Welcome back, folks, to the Technical Update Series wrap-up with the esteemed editor of TED Mag and Light TED Mag, Scott Costa, and yours truly, Michael Colligan. Today we're going to talk a little bit about germicidal UV and what Gabe Arnold and Jason Tenge were talking about, and I'll just give my thoughts and talk to Scott Costa about it here. But before we do that, we got to give thanks and gratitude to the sponsors of all this, which have made this all possible, and that's Cooper Lighting. Go to COOPERLIGHTING.com. That's right, cooperlighting.com. What's happening, Scott Costa?
Not much, man. How are you today?
Doing
Thanks
well?
for having me on.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Great episode. You get some great guests. I mean, those two. I'm not going to try and pronounce their names again, but super guest. I mean, super knowledgeable, great guests. Very well spoken. Can really explain, what it is that we're talking about. So, a great episode. Well done.
What can
Well
you say?
done.
What can you say about PNNL? I mean, the people,
Yeah.
they have the resources.
Mhm.
They're so interested in monitoring. It's just such a wonderful organization. My hat's off to those folks.
Yeah, yeah. So I had some takeaways, and I have like a bazillion questions. Hopefully, this isn't going to be a full hour, but we'll
Sure.
go from there. So, give me. I mean, what do you? I don't know a ton about germicidal ultraviolet, uh, lighting at all. To be honest with you, it's I'm not an engineer, and it's not something that I follow incredibly closely. But give me an idea. I mean, you talked a lot about. I mean, can you give me a guess about how many tests are out there on the effectiveness or the safety of these I mean, it seems like you guys were talking, and there were a lot of different tests out there, and a lot. Who am I going to believe? We live in this world. Like, who do I trust with this testing? What was your takeaway on that? As a consumer, I think, who am I going to trust when the testing is done? Because it seems like there's a lot out there.
So the first of all, the testing is. I'm going to give you a preface to that so that people can understand what we're
Okay.
talking about.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first thing to understand about germicidal UV, okay, as vis-a-vis disinfection of human
Mhm.
occupied spaces. Okay,
Right.
so not water disinfection, not this sort of stuff. Other things where germicidal has been used for a long time. We're talking about disinfecting human occupied spaces. Okay, so as a contributor to the cleaning and the that sort of stuff. First of all, there's three types of germicidal UV for those purposes. Okay, the first is passive air disinfection. Okay, the second one is active air disinfection. And the third is surface disinfection. Okay? So when they're talking about the testing, they're not talking about passive air or active air disinfection. They're talking about the surface disinfection. Or they're talking about LED created active air disinfection devices. Okay? The idea of germicidal UV, which is why I ran out before the show and for passive air disinfection, is not a new idea. So this is a Philips catalog, okay? And Scott will scan this and show it overlaid earlier on. But this is a Philips catalog from 1991, okay? And the information, if you go back to it, references studies from the 1970s and the 1960s and the 1980s,
Hmm.
okay? And what it outlines is how to use germicidal UV to disinfect air, how to use it, all the energy, the calculations, how much you need, and everything else. So when we're
Yeah.
talking about air disinfection, this is not a new problem. It's simply a matter of finding applications that are suitable for it, preparing those spaces with the right kind of paints, and then commissioning them properly so that they work effectively. They absolutely work. They've been used in tuberculosis wards. Tuberculosis has the similar kind of profile as a COVID-19 would in terms of how it's transmitted and these sorts of things. And so passive air disinfection works. We know it works. It's been used for decades. Okay? So
Hmm.
there's no issue. The issue is whether or not it's time for LEDs to enter this space. How long do they work for? What's the maintenance profile on them? And does the word LED cause problems in people's minds with the idea about their lifetimes? So the lifetime of an LED light source in active air or passive air disinfection or active air disinfection is the same as a mercury source. Okay? So maybe a year. and then that device will have to be changed. That's exactly the problems there. So when we're talking about these things, testing-wise, whether it works, the problem with what happened in the pandemic in the beginning is that people were obsessed with touching things.
Yeah.
Okay? They were spraying their grapefruit with Clorox. They were wiping down Amazon packages with these Clorox disinfectant wipes or Lysol or whatever.
Yeah.
And they were worried about whether the virus could exist in a container from China and arrive and pop out of the container and infect. Like, this is the kind of stuff that was going on. And so
you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay. And so in the beginning, people were buying these robots that would go around and touch everything, and they're thinking about putting these germicidal lights into freezers and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden everyone went, whoa, hang on, this is a very dangerous technology. We have to be extremely careful with this. And then all of a sudden it came out that speaking moistly is not a thing when it comes to COVID-19. And I'm quoting the eminent, in quotations, Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, who said we don't want to speak moistly, which is why we want to wear masks and all this sort of stuff, because the water droplets. Then it turns out that COVID-19 is an airborne virus. It goes through the air, and it doesn't stay on surfaces. All of a sudden, at that point, the germicidal UV dropped out of the picture. And it just went from like, this is going to be the greatest thing ever, to being, well, who cares, because it only affects the air. We can't see the air. We can't scrub the air. And so there's no theatrical part of it. And that's where it lost its sort of flavor with the public. Thank God for that. Okay? Because people were so hysterical about the surfaces that they were considering deploying. I threw my sunglasses, I don't know if you remember, on a Like That Online video show. I did a thing, and I threw my sunglasses at the camera, because I'm like, this is crazy, people. We don't want to be sterilizing the eyeballs of children in kindergartens to protect from COVID-19. Once the surface thing was lost, which is what everyone's talking about, does it disinfect surfaces? Most of the viruses that we want to kill with UV are airborne viruses. And so where does it stand as a business issue? I think there is a ton of applications for passive air disinfection and possibly for active air disinfection if we can come up with a maintenance schedule on the LED products that go inside and we have replaceable components to put in there. I think there's a massive application, and we add to it, and I've taken a lot of heat to this, we add a huge element of theater to it. And so people can see that these devices are cleaning air. And I think if we can do that as an industry, there's tons of applications for passive and active air disinfection in the world right now.
So I agree with you, and I'm going to talk about the theater, which you mentioned in the live stream. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to ask you too about, what do you think it's going to take? I mean, my opinion is the damage has kind of been done. Again, you were talking about, people wiping down their milk jugs when they came home from the grocery store and things like that. There's still a percentage of people, and it's usually the loudest people in the room, which frustrates me, at, for example, school board meetings, who are going to say, you're going to burn my son's eyes out when you put these light bulbs in, even though they're completely wrong. They don't care. But they're the ones who insist on having, the first speaker at the school board meeting. I know I'm only supposed to get 3 minutes, but I'm going to keep screaming well beyond 10. And then the police are going to escort me out, and the theater of the bizarre is going to happen. And the result is I made my point, and we're not getting anywhere. We talked a little bit about it. You said a little bit, but what really needs to be done on the marketing side to let people understand facts, which is a big problem on a number of topics, but it's certainly a problem here. What do we need to do to get folks to understand facts?
Yeah, I think, well, first we have to establish the facts. Okay, that's the first thing.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
We have to establish what those facts are. The second thing is, I would, just to comment on society, it's like you get a voice. You get to voice your opinions in our democracy. You don't get to intimidate people with attitude, okay? And I think that what we've seen
Yeah.
You know, there's been a lot of, and then this goes for both sides of whatever argument it
Oh,
is, right?
absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. Yep.
like you don't get to show people down. The biggest problem, and he's made it. He's been making his appearance on our Restoring Darkness work lately. You'll see it because we've just recorded it,
Uh-huh.
and that's, you know, Johnny Safety Strawman. He seems to come in the room a lot, and Mr. Strawman, he doesn't have to prove any of his arguments. He just uses the word safety, and then everybody else's piles of facts and studies and everything else that comes along with it gets burned in a pile because Mr. Strawman doesn't have to support his ideas with facts. And that's vis-a-vis many things, okay? But I mean,
Right.
with
Right.
respect to germicidal UV, there are applications where this is effective. So I would say the key to this industry is to avoid the schools in the interim. Okay, let's avoid schools and children and all of that as much as possible, and go to places that, number one, have significant engineering departments that are in control of the maintenance of the facility. Okay, so for example, Grand Central Station, or the subway station, the Toronto Transit Commission. Okay, these places that have significant maintenance resources, that have engineers on staff that manage the buildings, let's start in those places where we're speaking to people who are intelligent, informed stakeholders, that have the kind of education to understand this type of technology. We start with them, right? The second place I would go is into obvious applications, okay? To me, one of the most obvious applications is waiting rooms at hospitals and walk-in clinics.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay?
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I remember during the pandemic, okay? At the beginning of the pandemic, we had this whole you can't go to the doctor when you're sick phenomenon. Remember that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what?
Right.
Why?
Yeah,
Well,
that's what it's all about. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I can't go to the doctor when I'm sick. My kid has an ear infection. Well, you got to go to the emergency room because the doctors are only seeing healthy people. Like, how did we come up with that stupid idea? But anyway,
right.
so anyway, once they finally opened, I had to go to the doctor for some reason, and they were standing. All these elderly people. I get to the doctor, and they're all standing in the hallway outside the waiting room on stairs, waiting for their temperature checks and to be dressed in hazmat suits to go see the doctor. And and everybody in that stairwell was coughing, aching, whatever. And I thought to myself, like, why not just put this passive air disinfection into the waiting room, paint the ceiling with the UV resistant paint, and off we go to the races here. Like, this is such an obvious application,
Right.
and it can be controlled with a sensor system that has a deactivation switch on the wall. So if somebody actually has to go do maintenance, you turn it off. It's very simple. And so I think we start with applications like Grand Central Station, where there's an engineering department, or airports, and then areas where sick people tend to congregate and rebreathe the air together around other people. Those areas I think most people would welcome a sign saying on the wall, the air is currently being disinfected with germicidal UV. Do not put your hand above the lights that are above the ceiling. And those lights are 8 feet up in the air anyway.
Yeah. Right. If
Right?
not more. Exactly.
And and they're inverted, and they're shining up on a ceiling that with a paint that absorbs the UV and also doesn't decay under UV. And then as the air circulates through the room, it will be disinfected. Vis-a-vis the catalog from 1991 outlining the research in 1974 about how to disinfect the air in tuberculosis wards, folks.
Right.
Right? So the doctors and nurses don't get sick when they're treating the patients.
Right. So do you think there's a way we can compile that data to say, hey, you know what? In so-and-so number of hospital waiting rooms in Grand Central Station, there have been no confirmed, I don't know, what do you want to call them, spores of COVID. There have been no, micro, you know what I'm saying? I mean, people are going to want a little more, which again, you got into the theater stuff, and I will get further into it, but it would be great if somehow you can compile that data. If somehow, again, the computer chip is inserted into the germicidal light that says, by the way, we know that this, I mean, you've heard it before about, the 99.997% pure. If there was a way to prove, hey, the air in this facility, the air in this location is as clean as anything's ever been. I think that's a huge selling point in terms of efficacy, improving the efficacy.
Yeah, I don't know if the efficacy is not in question. If the system is maintained, we know it works. There's no shortage of data or research. Someone just has to do what I did, which is go over to the Atlas Lighting Library here in Toronto, where we have all our old catalogs that we never threw out, go through it and read the myriad of proof that Philips put together in the 80s about why this works and why people should buy it for a host of different applications, from food and beverage disinfection through to pharmaceutical, animal and poultry. Like, I mean, all of your eggs that you eat are disinfected with germicidal UV. Okay?
Right.
Everything. Right? So all the water you drink from municipal water is disinfected with germicidal UV. And so with this technology is well known, it's abundant, it's cheap, it's ready to go. The question is that, how do we, without creating hysteria, okay, how do we practically approach, like, you're going to get tuberculosis. How do we practically approach the key applications that can really, really use this? Not the kindergarten classroom for the screaming lady who's, wants her kid in a hazmat suit before it goes to kindergarten. Like, not the other end. I don't want my kids anywhere near radiation, because as soon as you say radiation, everyone freaks out. But that's what it is, ultraviolet radiation. But I mean, so let's stay out of the schools, stay out of places, anything involving children, daycares, anything like that. Stay out of that, and let's focus. And on these waiting rooms, on these areas where sick people tend to sit and wait for long periods of time, or where thousands of people traverse through intermittently during the day. So people don't hang out at Grand Central Station. They go there, they wait for their train, they get on the train, they leave. These areas are so much more powerful places for us to look into and deploy. Why don't they do it? To be honest with you, I would say that UVC, of all the measures that were taken, okay, of all the measures that were taken during the pandemic, and you can be happy about them or pissed off about them or whatever. That's not relevant to this conversation. Whether you like lockdowns or don't like lockdowns or 6-foot distancing, whatever. I don't really care about what you think. The only one that wasn't tried was the one that is the most proven.
Right.
Right? People putting in HEPA filters and all this kind of crazy shit. My kid's school spent thousands and thousands of dollars on HEPA filters that do absolutely nothing to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Right? Now, why is that? I don't know. And I am banging my head because the one thing that we know works and works effectively and has decades of evidence proving that it works, we didn't try.
That's correct. I don't exactly, and that's my point. I don't know how we push people across the finish line, but we got to get across the lighting industry, the germicidal ultraviolet lighting industry has got to push people across the finish line through different marketing, different something. I don't know what they have to do to really kind of get the end user, the me's of the world, who I'm not buying and selling and installing germicidal lighting. I'm just consuming it. How do you get people like me to feel more comfortable about what it is that every room that I walk into, hospital waiting rooms like you talked about, and that I think is where the real push needs to come from. When you were doing the live stream, just for a joke, I thought it was a joke, and the internet's a horrible place. I know it is. But I Googled germicidal ultraviolet lighting horror stories, and it was not pretty. And I don't think any of it's true.
All of it's with surface all of it's with surface disinfection.
Right. But folks at home don't realize that. They just think, oh, it's horrible. Oh God, it's bad. Okay. No, I don't want that. I mean, somebody has to get the consumer across the finish line to say, you're not reading
I
the
don't.
right stuff. You're
I
not
don't think the
understanding the right
consumer
information.
has
Yeah.
to be involved in all, and I'll tell you why. I think I don't think we need to. I think that when what you're saying is, I don't think we ever need to get through to the people that are disrespectful of other people's time, that spend 10 minutes talking when they only have 3 minutes, and shout
Yeah.
and scream and yell at
Right.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't think we need to convince or persuade them. I don't think that's. I think that's a complete waste of time. I think what we need to do is convince sophisticated people, doctors, engineers, these
Yeah.
kinds of people, and I don't think we even need the permission of the public. To I think the owner of a local walk-in clinic you could go to him and say, or her, and say, hey, it's $6,000 to put a passive air disinfection system into the waiting room of this facility, and you don't need any permission from anyone to do that other than the Electrical Safety Authority, okay, which is going to
Yeah.
come and
Yeah.
review the electrical installation. And then after that, we're going to send a painter in, and he's going to paint the ceiling and the walls with a UV resistant paint, so the paint doesn't peel
Right.
off, absorptive and resistant. And then 90% of the virus is in the air will be deactivated, I think is the correct word, every 20 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like that sounds like a no-brainer to Michael Colligan
Right.
here.
Yeah, I agree. So what you're saying is get that first wave.
Yes.
Let's get that first wave through.
Yes.
Okay.
Develop
Get
the
it.
equipment.
I understand. Yeah.
Right? The problem is with the surface disinfection, while there is, it sounds amazing. You just shine this light on it. Everybody knows that we're living things too. And I don't know about that 260 nanometers or whatever the heck the number is. It doesn't seem to hurt humans at all, but it kills all the bacteria. You know what?
Yeah.
It's going to be doing something to us. It's a matter of tolerance. So let me ask you this. Let's say you land at LaGuardia Airport, okay? And you have to go to the washroom. So you walk into the washroom. You know, an airport washroom. It's big. You can bring your suitcase into the place.
Yeah.
And when you go in, a light comes on, okay? And you use the washroom. When you go out, another light comes on, but you can't see it. So for maybe a second or half a second, you were exposed to a very low level of LED germicidal UV, okay, that disinfected the toilet and the floor, and maybe for a second or two. And so that technology where it's like it doesn't look like it hurts humans, and people are only going to be exposed to it for a very short period of time when they enter a bathroom or leave the bathroom, and then while it's empty, it's being disinfected. I think everyone would go, hell yeah, let's go,
I
disinfect
absolutely
that
would.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
I absolutely would.
Yeah. And so there are applications for that stuff, but I'm very reticent to have it in general applications for human occupation. Intermittent applications in very, very busy places where people are passing through those places. And so not the bathroom in your office at work that you go in and out of all day long, that you're going into, you get exposed
Sure.
to it every day, 6 times a day, but it's actually just in airports, train stations, these types. So it's a minimal application. The active air disinfection piece or passive air disinfection piece, that is something that should be anywhere sick people tend to congregate. That should be in the
Right.
building code. That should be
Sure.
deployed 100%,
Right.
in my opinion.
And then what about cost? Again, you mentioned theater. What about cost? I mean, do you think that's an inhibitor as we talk today? Do you think that's I mean, you mentioned again, for $6,000 you can do a waiting room, which seems to me reasonable. But where do you think it's going? I mean, where are we at today in terms of cost? And that's everything. That's like you said in the live stream, putting a light on saying things are being disinfected right now, or this room is 100% disinfected, whatever. Where do you see? Is it I don't want to say cost effective. That's not really a fair way of putting it, but is it cost comfortable? It's like, yes, I will spend X amount of dollars to make myself feel comfortable about what's happening as I'm passing through your locations. Where are we at on cost?
So I quoted a bunch of these jobs, and nobody said yes. which was absolutely shocking to me. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not talking about the
Okay.
schools where I kind of talked to them a little bit about. I'm talking about doctors' offices and places like this where I went to, and you know, they're like, you're walking to these places, people are wearing hazmat suits, dude. I'm not kidding you.
Exactly. Right. Oh
And
no, I've been to the doctor a few weeks ago. I saw it. Yeah.
I'm bringing you information of a provable and liable system which will continually disinfect the air in this space all day long. And the catalog is from 1991, and it's talking about tuberculosis wards and here, let me read to you. Microorganisms floating freely in the room air are reached without fail by UV radiation. Air disinfection leads to an appreciable reduction in the number of airborne organisms in the room because the air is forced by natural circulation into the irradiated region. Thus, the danger of airborne infection, which is a major factor in many illnesses, is considerably reduced. Okay? This is science. This is the science.
Exactly. Right. And
Okay?
people still wouldn't pull the trigger based on dollars.
Right. But guess what they would
concerns
do? They would spend a fortune on hazmat suits and gloves and masks and send people out to like conspicuously clean in front of you.
Yeah. Right.
Okay?
Right.
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
doesn't
those
really
are-
do anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Cons-
Oh yeah, I
you
know
know,
exactly what you're talking about.
Wiping everything down after they like it's like it was like it was Cuckooville. And so but here I am with a proven, and you know what the problem was? No theater. No theater. It just worked. It just didn't provide that feeling that people needed. And I screamed it from the rooftops, bring the theater in here. And all I was accused of was being a charlatan because I only wanted something that looked like it worked when it didn't. And I'm saying, look, it does work.
It does work. Right. So
just
what's it
read
going
it.
to take? Yeah. Well, I mean, do you think it's going to take a better theater or a better cost point to make more sales?
Okay, so 4 fixtures. I was going to make, if I was going to do the project, I was going to make about $4,000 on it, on $6,000. That gives you an idea of how much the equipment costs.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
now it wasn't
right.
LED at that time. It was, I would still, if someone asked me, like as a practitioner, if they said to me, you know, Michael, I really want to do this, I would still use, I wouldn't use LED. I would use low pressure mercury lamps, which are basically a fluorescent lamp with clear glass. Okay?
Yeah, right.
With LED phosphor in it. And I would still use that. I would buy a fixture where I had one designed. I had a fixture designed. It cost like $40, sheet metal and a ballast, right?
Yeah,
and I told them you
right.
just have to change the lamp every year, and paint the ceiling. Painting the ceiling, what was it, $500, $600 to paint the ceiling?
If that, yeah, right.
Mount it on the ceiling. Air circulates through the room. All the instructions are right here in my catalog. I'll build this for you right now, sir. And I'll give you the amount of radiation per meter squared, meter cubed, and you'll have everything, and you'll be off to the races. No theater. We'll put a sign up that says the air, you know, with the warnings on not to touch it. That kind of tripped them, but then they went back to their ineffective. Why did we do? There's so many questions about the pandemic that we could ask that have nothing to do with germicide or UV.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is such an obvious revenue generator for the industry. It is such a wonderful thing, and I don't know why. And there's so many applications where it would be used seamlessly and totally safe, no problems. Get it on a maintenance routine. For lighting distributors, you can be back in there every year, changing light bulbs for them, for contractors and distributors, changing out the bulbs, maintaining the system. We have all the knowledge, all the technology, all the engineering, all the research, all the science, all the data. We have everything we need to deploy, but nobody talks about it, Scott.
Yeah. That's the frustrating part, is when there's a real fact-based solution, and it's the world we live in, real fact-based solution at really an acceptable price right now, and it's still, like you tell these horror stories of, look, I can do this for you for a reasonable amount, and you said no. So I think that's where the frustration, and I'm sorry I fired you up on it. I didn't mean that, but it's really frustrating. I mean, I can see why it would be so frustrating.
This one place would have needed 4 fixtures, okay?
Yeah.
They would need to be shielded on the side with the lamp recessed, so that light there was no spillage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
The light would shine up at the ceiling by a certain amount of feet per this and that, and the air would circulate over top of that light, and all the viruses would be deactivated, and germs and spores and everything would be deactivated immediately as they cross that plane. Okay, and what does a fluorescent fixture cost? $50,
About
right?
something like that.
Yeah. What is a general, like an F30T8 UV bulb cost? $20, right? So it's what, call it $100 for the bulb. It's $400 a year to change the lamps, and it's $120 each for the fixture, and then the installation is, I don't know, 2 days at $65 an hour, right?
Right.
Put a switch on a deactivated switch on the wall, and a sensor that controls those lights, so they're only on when the room is occupied. When it's not occupied, they go off on their own. And there's the deactivation switch for the whole system right here. You can turn it off if you need to go up to the ceiling and do something. And there's a big warning sign on the wall. The whole job was going to cost me $1,000 to $1,500.
Meanwhile, what did 2.5 years of hazmat suits and masks cost? Because that's what you spent the money on instead of this.
And Lysol and all. And you know what? None of it worked.
Right. But that's what people spent the money on. Doesn't matter. They still spent the money on it. Instead of this. Well, that's where the frustration.
I'm not being critical. I'm not trying to be critical here.
No. Yeah.
Okay. But, I think there's something to playing to people's emotions. So if we could figure out a way to make air dangerous, people don't think air is dangerous.
Right. You're right.
They don't.
You're right.
Like, I'll tell you that there's another thing that's super interesting. Like, the air in your home or in your business is way more polluted than the air outside. Okay? Yeah. No matter how polluted your city is, unless you live in Shanghai, okay, or Shenzhen.
Right.
Or Mumbai. But we don't live there.
Yeah,
we live in Toronto. We live in, in Missouri. We live in LA. Yeah. The air is clean outside. In fact, when you do a mold test on the air, what they do is they don't actually test the mold in your air. They test the mold in your house, and they compare it to the mold outside, and they check the difference. And if the difference is higher than a certain threshold, then your house is moldy. It's not a number. It's a comparison. It's a percentage versus the outdoor mold versus the indoor mold. Right, so they know if it's the difference between the mold spores on the outdoor is higher, because you could have a moldy day outside.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So they have they compare. That's how they test it. There's no your mold is 350 in your home. That doesn't matter unless you test the air outside. What is it versus the air outside? Is it 10? If it's 10 times more, then there's a mold generating issue in the house, or whatever. I don't know what the metric is.
Yeah.
But people don't think the air is dangerous, which is why Prime Minister Trudeau didn't want us to speak moistly, right? Oh, you're breathing the air in a restaurant. The air is containing, each breath you take in has millions of viruses in it and bacteria and spores, right? So that's what we want to deactivate, and if we can deactivate that at a rate that's significant, we will be healthier and better off. And why no one went for it, I don't understand. I really, truly, Scott, I cannot tell you why this was not embraced.
Yeah.
I can't.
I know. Like I said, I just think we got to push folks across the finish line somehow. It'll be interesting to see
leadership.
I think that's a great point.
How do I want to piss off another organization?
Here we go.
The problem with germicidal UV is that it's not really a lighting play.
Right. Exactly.
Right? All the equipment is exactly the same as lighting equipment. All the technology is the same, but it's not a lighting play. It's more of an HVAC play. So should the IES did some work on it, right? Mostly focused on surface disinfection, by the way, which is not the main area where we can work here. All the research that they need to do is in the surface disinfection. Okay. There's no research needed in the air disinfection. And leadership. I don't know who the leader is going to be. There's the UV Society of the World International Ultraviolet Light Society. I can't remember I interviewed the president of that association a couple years ago. But that association generally is thinking about water disinfection. That's their. If you've ever been to a water disinfection plant, there's hundreds of UV lamps in there.
Sure.
Going on the water. So, I don't know what the concerns are or why it wasn't adopted. I think we simply think that all of the decisions were made out of hysterical fear and accepted by the public because they were afraid. and they couldn't get their heads around that the virus was airborne.
Right.
They couldn't get their heads around that. And they continually not get their heads around that. And so I think the industry should set up a committee that then lobbies the government for specific applications of this technology and provides training and certification for frontline practitioners, which include agents, distributors, and contractors, where they can be certified as a certified germicidal,
installer.
ultraviolet, UV, active air disinfection installer.
Right.
And if we could do that, then we would have a ton of applications move forward. Without that, we have no one to do it because it's lighting equipment, but it's not a lighting industry play. So there's nobody to do this. We could do it and make a ton of money, Scott.
There we go. That's
blah,
our
blah,
plan.
blah. I could go on forever. You know me.
Yeah. This was great, though. Thanks a ton for bringing up this topic again, and we probably need to continue to watch it, obviously, in the future, and kind of see where it goes, and hopefully it moves forward as the disinformation hopefully disappears faster, and the real facts, continue to move to the forefront. I think that's an important part.
Disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. What are you going to do? We live in an age, don't we? I certainly live in an age. Maybe there's just too much information. How about that? Maybe that's the answer. It's too much. Can't tell the signal from the noise. Hey, we love you folks. I know I speak on behalf of Mr. Costa, the esteemed editor of Light TED Mag and TEDMag.com, respectively, both.com, and Cooper Lighting. I can't tell you enough about Cooper Lighting. Supporting this kind of thing is such a wonderful thing for them to do, to support these kinds of conversations and to be really the people that make it happen. At the end of the day, everyone has to get paid here except me, of course, but the producers and all the people involved. So you got to go to cooperlighting.com. Check them out. Go to COOPERLIGHTING. And this has been the Technical Update Series wrap up. That's right. We're wrapping it up. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.